I never thought an ordinary Tuesday morning could change everything. At 66, I believed I'd seen every kind of storm a man could face. I'd worked 38 years as a maritime engineer, raised a son, buried a wife, and learned to keep my bearings through rough waters. But nothing prepares you for the kind of betrayal that comes dressed as family. It was early October, the Maine coast caught between the last blush of autumn and the sharp bite of winter. The fog rolled in heavy that morning, swallowing the harbor below my cottage in Camden. I was pouring my second cup of coffee when the phone rang. "Mr. Bennett, this is Lydia from Pierce and Holland LLP. We're ready to proceed with your late wife's estate settlement. Can you come in at 2 this afternoon?" Her tone was cool, professional, but something about it made my stomach tighten. Eleanor had passed 5 months ago, leaving behind her small shipping company and the property we built together by Penobscot Bay. We'd talked about everything before she died, how her estate would go to me first, then to our son David. It was simple. There shouldn't have been any surprises. "Yes," I said. "I'll be there." After hanging up, I sat for a long moment staring at the framed photo of Eleanor on the mantel. Her soft smile looked almost alive in the morning light. She'd always been the steady one, the calm to my storm. Losing her still felt like being adrift with no compass. I dressed carefully: navy sweater, gray slacks, the wool coat she'd given me our last Christmas together. She used to say the color made me look distinguished. I smiled faintly at the memory, then picked up the worn leather briefcase that still smelled faintly of salt and oil. It had traveled across more oceans than I could count. The drive into Portland took just over an hour. The roads were slick from the morning mist, and leaves skittered across the pavement like frightened birds. I kept thinking about David and his wife, Tessa. They had insisted I let the law firm handle everything, claiming it would make things easier. I'd agreed because I didn't have the energy to argue. But lately, something about Tessa's cheerful politeness had begun to feel rehearsed, as if she were performing kindness instead of offering it. When I pulled into the parking garage beneath the Pierce and Holland building, the gray concrete walls felt colder than the sea air outside. I parked near a pillar, turned off the engine, and reached for my briefcase. My hands were shaking, though I couldn't say why. That's when I heard a voice. Sir, wait!" I turned, startled. A man was hurrying toward me from behind one of the pillars. His jacket was torn at the elbow, his jeans faded, his boots scuffed with salt stains. He looked like someone who'd worked the docks his whole life hard, sunburned, a little broken. "Can I help you?" I asked, instinctively stepping back. "Don't start that car," he said, breathing hard. "Please, Mr. Bennett, just don't." The way he said my name stopped me cold. "Who are you?" He glanced around nervously before lowering his voice. "Name's Ray Hollister. I used to work upstairs at Pierce and Holland. They threw me out 3 weeks ago, said I talked too much. But before that, I saw things you need to know." I frowned, confused. "What kind of things?" He took a cautious step closer, his eyes desperate but clear. "Your daughter-in-law, Tessa. She's been meeting with Mr. Holland behind closed doors for months. There's talk that she's had prepared documents, that claim you're no longer capable of managing your finances." My blood turned to ice. "That's ridiculous." "I wish it were," Ray said. "But I've seen the files. She's saying you're showing signs of dementia, that you've been forgetting conversations, misplacing money. They've got fake statements ready, medical reports, witness notes. They're going to try to take control of your wife's company and your property too." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My grip on the briefcase loosened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Eleanor was kind to me," he said quietly. "She used to bring coffee for everyone when she came to the office. She deserved better than this. And you deserve to know what's coming." I studied him. His clothes were worn, his beard untrimmed, but his eyes, those eyes were steady. He wasn't lying. "They're expecting you to just sign whatever they put in front of you," he went on. "Don't. Not until you've read every line. And if they pressure you, walk out." The elevator dinged somewhere behind us. Ray flinched, glancing over his shoulder. "I've said too much already." he murmured. Just be careful. Before I could ask another question, he turned and disappeared into the maze of parked cars. I stood there for a long time, my heart hammering. The smell of exhaust filled the air. The idea that Tessa, my daughter-in-law, could be involved in something like this seemed impossible. Yet a small, sharp instinct in my gut told me Ray wasn't wrong. I pressed the elevator button and looked at my reflection in the steel doors. The man staring back at me looked older than he felt, tired eyes, silver hair, but still strong enough to fight if he had to. As the elevator doors slid open, I whispered softly to Eleanor's memory, "If you can hear me, sweetheart, give me a sign, because I think a storm's about to hit." And with that, I stepped inside, unaware that the moment I reached the 15th floor, everything I thought I knew about my family and my late wife's legacy would begin to unravel. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, spilling warm light across polished marble floors. The 15th floor of Pierce & Holland looked more like an art gallery than a law office, gleaming wood panels, gold-framed maritime paintings, soft jazz drifting from hidden speakers. The scent of expensive coffee and lemon polish hung in the air. For a moment, I stood there, trying to steady my nerves. Ray's warning echoed in my head like a ticking clock. Every step toward that conference room felt heavier than the last. "Mr. Bennett," a young receptionist with perfect posture smiled from behind a glossy walnut desk. "They're expecting you in conference room B." Her tone was sweet, almost rehearsed. I nodded and followed the corridor. The sound of my shoes clicking against marble was the only thing breaking the silence. Through the frosted glass doors at the end of the hallway, I saw silhouettes moving, 3 men in suits, and 1 woman sitting with her legs crossed. Even without seeing her face, I knew it was Tessa. She had a way of sitting, as if every room belonged to her. I pushed the door open. "Dad," she said brightly, standing up as if this were a family brunch, not a legal meeting. "You made it. I wasn't sure you remembered." The words were coated in sugar, but carried the sting of acid. Ray had warned me she'd try to paint me as forgetful. I smiled thinly. "I remember everything worth remembering." The 3 lawyers rose slightly in greeting before motioning for me to sit. The one in the center, tall, thin, with slicked back hair and ice blue eyes, extended his hand. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Richard Holland. This is my associate, Mr. Lang, and our paralegal, Miss Avery. We're so sorry for your loss. Your wife was a remarkable woman." "She was," I said quietly. Holland gestured toward a stack of documents laid neatly on the table. "We've prepared the final transfer of assets for the Bennett shipping estate. A few amendments were made in the last weeks of Mrs. Bennett's life, just to ensure her wishes were carried out properly." I raised an eyebrow. "Amendments?" Tessa leaned forward. "Oh, yes. Didn't David tell you? Mom made some small adjustments to make sure everything would be handled responsibly." My pulse quickened. Handled responsibly? Eleanor and I discussed every detail of her will before she passed. There was nothing left to adjust. Holland's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sometimes, Mr. Bennett, people reconsider as circumstances change, particularly when concerns arise regarding management capability." "Management capability," I repeated slowly, feeling the chill crawl up my spine. Tessa placed her hand on mine as if she were consoling a child. "Dad, please don't take this the wrong way. We've just noticed lately you've been a little scattered, misplacing things, forgetting appointments. It happens at your age." I pulled my hand away. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Nothing alarming," Holland said quickly. "Only that your late wife wanted to ensure stability. The amended will transfers the controlling interest of Bennett Shipping to a family trust, managed jointly by your son and daughter-in-law. You would retain a monthly stipend for living expenses." My stomach dropped. "A stipend?" "Yes, sir," Lang added. "You'd have full comfort and care, without the burden of financial management." I stared at the papers. Comfort and care. That was their polite way of saying controlled and sidelined. "I'd like to read these documents myself," I said, keeping my tone calm. "Of course." Holland pushed them forward, but his smile faltered. Everything's been notarized and approved. I opened the folder, forcing my hands to stay steady. The first page was a revised last will and testament, dated 2 weeks before Eleanor died. The signature at the bottom looked like hers but slightly off, the loops tighter, the slant sharper. She'd always signed her name with a flourish, as if she was finishing a poem. This was clinical, mechanical. The next pages listed medical reports, supposedly from Dr. Felix Norland, a neurologist I'd never heard of. Subject shows mild cognitive decline, recommends third-party financial oversight. I looked up. I've never met this doctor. Tessa blinked innocently. You must have forgotten. He evaluated you last spring, remember? During your checkup? No, I said firmly. My last doctor was Dr. Patel, and I haven't had a cognitive test in my life. The air in the room shifted. Holland adjusted his tie. Mr. Bennett, I assure you, this report came directly from your physician's office. Then you won't mind if I call him right now. Tessa's face went pale. Dad, please, let's not make a scene. Everyone here is trying to help. I met her gaze, and for the first time, I saw it the flicker of fear behind her eyes. Ray had been right. I'm not signing a thing until I verify every word in this file, I said. Mr. Lang cleared his throat. Sir, if we could move this along. I said no. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through steel. Even the hum of the air vent seemed to pause. I could feel the tension rising in the room like static before a lightning strike. Then, just as I was about to close the folder, something caught my eye, a small red glint beneath the edge of the table. A recording device, blinking steadily. Are you recording this meeting? I asked. My voice calm, but deadly quiet. Tessa froze. Holland hesitated. It's standard procedure for estate documentation. Standard procedure, I repeated, pushing my chair back. Without consent? Before anyone could respond, there was a knock at the door. A young secretary peeked in. Mr. Holland, there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent. Holland's jaw tightened. Tell him I'm occupied. He says it's about the Bennett file. I felt my pulse quicken. The secretary added, his name is Ray Hollister. Every face in the room shifted at once. Tessa's lips parted, her color draining completely. Holland's hand went rigid on the table. I don't know anyone by that name, he said sharply. Tell him to leave. Actually, I interrupted, standing up, I'd like to hear what Mr. Hollister has to say. Tessa's voice trembled. Dad, please, this isn't necessary. But it was too late. The door opened, and Ray stepped inside, carrying a weathered envelope in one hand and a small USB drive in the other. His presence filled the room like a gust of cold sea air. Afternoon, gentlemen, he said evenly. And Mrs. Bennett, he nodded at Tessa. Or should I say, soon-to-be ex-beneficiary. The shock on their faces told me everything I needed to know. At that moment, I realized the storm I'd felt brewing all morning had finally arrived, and it wasn't just about my wife's estate anymore. It was about truth, greed, and the fight to keep what was left of the life Eleanor and I had built. And for the first time that day, I felt ready for it. The room froze the second Ray stepped inside. The soft hum of the ceiling vent was the only sound as he shut the door behind him and laid the weathered envelope on the table. His clothes were cleaner than before, but his face carried the same steady determination I'd seen in the parking garage. Holland was the first to recover his voice. Mr. Hollister, you are trespassing. I'll have security escort you out immediately. Ray didn't even flinch. You can call whoever you like, but before you do, maybe you should explain why your firm filed 2 conflicting versions of the same will, one dated 6 months ago, one dated 2 weeks before Mrs. Bennett's death. A visible ripple of tension spread through the 3 lawyers. Tessa's breath caught audibly. That's absurd, Holland snapped. This man is a disgruntled ex-employee with a history of fabricating stories. Funny, Ray said, sliding the USB drive across the table. Because that flash drive holds encrypted backups of your own office database, the ones you thought you deleted when you fired me. Holland went pale. Lang reached for the drive, but Ray's hand was faster. "Not yet," he said. "First, Mr. Bennett deserves to know what's really going on here." He turned to me. "Sir, your wife's company, Bennett Maritime, wasn't just a small shipping outfit. 2 years ago, she bought a decommissioned shipyard in Belfast, Maine. She'd planned to reopen it as a marine training and restoration site for veterans. The property alone is worth over $6 million. I blinked, stunned. Eleanor never told me. "She meant it as a surprise," Ray continued. "But before she could finalize the nonprofit paperwork, she got sick. And when she realized how fast things were moving, she asked me to safeguard the records. She said, 'If anything ever happens, tell Charles to look in the dry dock ledger.'" I felt a strange ringing in my ears. "The dry dock ledger?" Ray nodded. "A bookkeeping log she kept at her home office. The original version is still there, showing her ownership of the Belfast shipyard. But these people," he shot a glare at the lawyers, "rewrote the property transfer documents to make it appear that the site was jointly owned by her son and daughter-in-law." Tessa stood abruptly, her voice trembling. "That's not true! You can't just walk in here and make wild accusations." Ray ignored her. "Mrs. Bennett, you paid this firm $80,000 in cash to process what you called a protective trust. The real purpose was to redirect all company assets to you and your husband within 6 months of Charles Bennett's death." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice broke halfway through. Ray reached into the envelope and produced a small digital recorder. He pressed play. A woman's voice filled the room, clear and warm, with that familiar tone that still haunted my dreams. "Ray, if you're hearing this, it means something has gone wrong. I've started to suspect that Tessa's visits aren't about helping me. She's been asking too many questions about the shipyard. I want you to hold on to the files I gave you. If Charles ever comes to see you, tell him the truth. He'll know what to do." My heart stopped. That voice, it was Eleanor. My Eleanor. Alive again for a few fleeting seconds through the small speaker. Tessa swayed where she stood, her hand gripping the back of her chair. That doesn't prove anything. Anyone could have faked her voice," Ray said. "You might want to stop talking before you make this worse." Detective Ava Monroe's name flickered in my mind. She was the local officer who'd handled Eleanor's hospice paperwork. She'd told me once that she admired Eleanor's meticulous nature. Now I understood why. My wife had foreseen this, every step of it. I looked at the lawyers. Their confidence was draining by the second. Holland whispered something to Lang, who quickly started closing files and powering down his laptop. "No one's leaving," I said quietly, surprising even myself. My voice carried the authority I hadn't used since my days commanding engineering crews at sea. "Not until someone explains how my wife's signature ended up on a fake will." Lang stammered, "Mr. Bennett, there must be a misunderstanding." "Save it," Ray said. He opened the final page of the folder. "Here's the original. Your wife signed this on March 18th before her health declined. And here's the one your firm created on April 28th, 2 weeks before she died. Look at the difference in stroke pressure and ink pattern. Anyone with half an eye can see which one's forged." I studied the 2 signatures. One was bold and graceful, just like Eleanor. The other trembled unnaturally, as if written by someone copying rather than signing. Tessa's composure shattered. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she cried. "We were just trying to protect what's left of the business," David said. "David doesn't know," Ray cut in. "I've seen the internal memos. This wasn't his idea. It was yours." She stared at him, her face ashen. "Mrs. Bennett," Holland said quickly, his voice sharp with panic, "don't say another word." Ray leaned back, arms crossed. "Oh, please. You think I'd come here without backup? The police are already on their way." I called Detective Monroe before I walked in. The room went dead silent. For a long, breathless moment, all I could hear was the muffled city noise outside, the distant horns, the faint cry of seagulls. Then, Tessa whispered something I'll never forget. She was never supposed to find out, she said, her voice trembling. Eleanor wasn't supposed to know. I stared at her. You mean my wife found out you were planning this while she was dying? Tessa's lips parted, but no words came. Her shoulders slumped, and she collapsed into her chair. In that instant, the pieces locked together: the strange visits Tessa made to Eleanor's hospice room, the sudden insistence that I let her handle the legal side, the way she'd avoided talking about the will ever since. It had all been an act. But Eleanor had outsmarted them, even from her deathbed. Ray's voice cut through the silence. Mr. Bennett, you might want to prepare yourself. This goes deeper than just forged papers. There's a whole network behind this firm. And your wife? Well, she might have known more than any of us realized. Before I could ask what he meant, the sound of sirens echoed faintly outside the building. The storm had arrived, and this time, it was bringing the truth with it. The sirens outside grew louder, echoing through the marble hallway like a warning bell before a storm. No one in the room moved. Tessa sat slumped in her chair, pale and trembling. Holland's face had turned the color of parchment, and Lang's hands shook as he fumbled to lock his laptop. Then the door opened, and two uniformed officers stepped inside, followed by a woman in a navy coat with a leather case under her arm. Her dark hair was pulled neatly back, her expression calm but sharp. Detective Ava Monroe, she said, flashing her badge. Which one of you is Charles Bennett? I am, I answered, standing up. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. She gave a short nod. Mr. Bennett, we received a call from Mr. Ray Hollister about potential document forgery and estate fraud connected to your late wife's company. May I see the files? Ray handed her the folder he'd brought, along with the USB drive. Detective Monroe set her case on the table and began laying everything out with precise movements. She didn't speak for several minutes as she compared signatures, scanned print dates, and examined notary stamps. The only sound in the room was the faint scratching of her pen across her notepad. Finally, she looked up. Mr. Holland, do you have an explanation for why there are two conflicting versions of Mrs. Bennett's will in your firm's possession? Holland cleared his throat. Detective, this is all a misunderstanding. The second document was a routine amendment requested by the client's family. We acted under good faith based on information provided by Mrs. Bennett's daughter-in-law. Tessa flinched. I never meant for it to... Ava held up a hand. We'll get to you in a moment, Mrs. Bennett. For now, Mr. Holland, are you aware that both documents bear different notary IDs, one of which belongs to a woman who died in 2019? Holland's mouth opened, then closed again. That's what I thought, she said coolly. Officers, please take the firm's server and any backup drives from their IT room. I'll need copies of all estate-related transactions for the past 12 months. The younger lawyer, Lang, muttered, You can't just... Yes, I can, she replied without looking at him. While the officers left to secure the equipment, Ava turned to me. Mr. Bennett, I'll need you to describe your relationship with Mrs. Tessa Bennett. Were there any recent conflicts or irregular financial activities before your wife's passing? I exhaled slowly. Tessa's my daughter-in-law. She and my son David have been married 10 years. Eleanor trusted her. I did too. But lately I've noticed small things, missing mail, calls from banks I didn't recognize, and then the way she started finishing my sentences, correcting details about my own life. It felt like she was rehearsing something. Ava nodded. Classic groundwork for competency manipulation. It's a common tactic in estate exploitation cases. I looked at Tessa. She stared down at her hands, her wedding ring catching the light like a blade. Mrs. Bennett, Ava said softly, would you like to tell me what's going on before I find out another way? For a long time, Tessa didn't speak. Then her shoulders shook, and her words came out in a hoarse whisper. It wasn't supposed to hurt anyone. We were drowning. David's business collapsed last year, investors pulled out, and we owed hundreds of thousands in loans. I thought, if we could just move some of the assets around, no one would get hurt. No one? I repeated. You forged medical reports about me. You made my wife think I was losing my mind. Tessa's eyes filled with tears. I didn't forge those myself. Mr. Holland said he had contacts who could handle the documentation. He promised it was legal, that it would protect you. Ava turned to Holland. Is that true? He swallowed hard. Detective, our firm sometimes assists clients in estate planning under sensitive circumstances. We rely on third-party services for verification. That's one way to say forgery, Ava said dryly. You're under investigation for fraud, document tampering, and conspiracy to defraud a senior citizen. Lang muttered. We had no idea Mrs. Bennet was being deceived. Ray stepped forward. Don't lie. You both knew. I warned you 6 months ago when I found the duplicate signature logs. You fired me for it. Ava turned to Ray. You have documentation of that? He nodded. I backed up every file before they wiped my credentials. You'll find timestamps, transaction receipts, and payment notes showing Mrs. Bennet's cash deposits. The total is $80,000. Ava's brow furrowed. That money came from you, Mrs. Bennet? Tessa nodded weakly. Yes, I took it from our savings. I thought it would buy time. David didn't know what I was doing. Where is your husband now? At home, she whispered. He thinks we're still waiting for the final papers. I felt the weight of those words settle like an anchor in my chest. My own son, unaware that his wife was dismantling our family's legacy behind his back. Or perhaps, a small voice whispered, he did know, and simply chose not to stop her. Ava gathered the documents into her case. Mr. Bennet, we'll need you to come to the station later this week to give a full statement. For now, I suggest you don't sign or touch anything related to this estate. Everything will be sealed until we complete the audit. I nodded. Understood. As the officers began escorting Holland and Lang out, Tessa rose shakily from her chair. Detective, please. Ava turned back. Mrs. Bennet, if you cooperate and provide everything you have, emails, receipts, text messages, the district attorney may consider leniency. Otherwise, you'll face the same charges as them. Tessa's voice broke. I'll cooperate. When they led her away, she glanced over her shoulder at me. Her expression wasn't anger or even guilt, it was shame. A small, silent plea for forgiveness that I wasn't ready to give. Ray waited until the room emptied, then looked at me. You all right, sir? I sank into the nearest chair. All right? My wife's been gone 5 months, and I just found out the people I trusted most tried to erase her legacy. I don't know if I'll ever be all right again. Ray gave a quiet nod. Then we make sure they never get away with it. Ava closed her case, then looked at me with something almost like respect. Your wife was clever, Mr. Bennet. The deeper we dig, the more I think she knew this was coming. There may be more documents, maybe even a backup will. A faint wind rattled the windows. Outside, the fog had thickened, swallowing the city in pale gray. I thought of Eleanor's voice from the recording, steady, cautious, protective. If anything happens, trust no one but Ray Hollister. It was only then that I realized. My wife hadn't left me defenseless. She'd been fighting for me long before I even knew there was a war. And the real truth, whatever she'd hidden, was still waiting to be found. The fog hadn't lifted when I drove back to Camden the next morning. The ocean looked heavy and gray, the kind of sea that warned sailors to stay home. My cottage sat quiet on the bluff, the gulls circling lazily above the water. I parked, shut off the engine, and just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My son was waiting for me on the porch. David stood in his work jacket, his shoulders hunched, his face drawn tight with exhaustion. Behind him, Tessa sat on the steps, her eyes red and puffy. For a moment, they looked like children caught doing something terrible and waiting for punishment. Dad, David began, his voice cracking. Can we talk? I'm listening, I said, stepping out of the car. Tessa rose slowly, clutching her coat around her as if it could hide her guilt. Charles, please, I know how this looks, but I held up my hand. Don't. We went inside. The house smelled of coffee and salt, the same as always. I set the kettle on the stove, more out of habit than thirst, and gestured for them to sit. David sat at the kitchen table, elbows on his knees. Detective Monroe came by last night. She told me everything. About the forged papers, the payments, the meeting. He rubbed his forehead. I swear to you, Dad, I didn't know what she was doing. Didn't you? I asked quietly. He looked up, startled. No, I thought she was just helping with Mom's legal things. She told me you were getting forgetful, that you mixed up bills and dates. I believed her. And you never questioned it? He hesitated. You did forget my birthday dinner last year. I didn't forget, I said. You canceled because Tessa had the flu. You texted me yourself. He opened his mouth, then closed it. A flush crept up his neck. I turned to Tessa. You fed him those stories, didn't you? Made me sound senile, confused. You even brought fake reports. Tessa's eyes glistened. I didn't know how else to fix things. The debts, the house, the credit cards, the failed boutique, it was all collapsing. David was drowning, and I thought if we could move the assets just for a while, pay off the loans, no one would get hurt. No one but your husband's parents, I said coldly. No one but the people who trusted you like a daughter. Tessa's voice cracked. You don't understand what it's like to lose everything. I leaned forward. Don't I? I lost my wife. I almost lost my home. And now, I've nearly lost my son, because you decided money mattered more than honor. David's head dropped into his hands. I swear, Dad, I didn't want this. I loved Mom. I'd never. You didn't have to forge anything to betray her, I said. All you had to do was stay silent, while someone else did. The kettle began to whistle. I turned off the burner and poured 3 cups of coffee. My hands were steady now. I'd spent the night reliving every moment of Eleanor's last weeks, her soft voice asking me not to worry, the way she'd insisted that Tessa handle some of the paperwork when her illness worsened. I'd trusted that kindness. She'd trusted that loyalty. Both of us had been wrong. David, I said quietly, when your mother was in hospice, how often did Tessa visit her alone? He frowned. A few times. She said she wanted to keep Mom company while I worked. Did she ever mention your mother signing anything? He shook his head. No. Why? I turned to Tessa. Because someone slipped documents into Eleanor's hospice file. Papers with her signature shaky and unnatural. The same ones used to rewrite her will. Tessa's lip trembled. I didn't make her sign. She was already weak. Holland said he could replicate her handwriting if I provided samples. He said everyone does it in high-value estates. David's face went white. You what? She broke then, sobbing into her hands. I thought it would just make things simpler. We were supposed to get control of the business, keep you on an allowance. You'd be taken care of. It wasn't meant to. To what? I snapped. Expose you? Because that's what happens when you build your life on lies. It falls apart. David stood up suddenly, knocking over his chair. You forged my mother's signature, Tessa. You lied to me for months. I did it for us, she screamed back, tears streaming down her face. You think I enjoyed it? You were too proud to ask for help. You let us drown in debt. I did what you wouldn't. He stared at her like she was a stranger. You did it by destroying the only family that ever helped us. The words hung heavy in the air. The only sound was the creak of the old clock above the mantel. Tessa sank back into her chair, shaking. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she whispered. Holland said it was legal. He said your father would never even know. I took a slow sip of coffee, studying her face, the same woman who had once stood in my kitchen, laughing with Eleanor, helping bake blueberry pie. Now she looked hollow, her eyes ringed with guilt. Do you know what hurts the most? I said softly. It's not the money. It's that your mother-in-law saw this coming and didn't tell me. She knew someone close would try to take everything. She just didn't know it would be you. Tessa looked up, horrified. She knew? She left a recording, I said, and a message for me. She said, to trust Ray Hollister. She said the truth, was in the dry dock ledger. Tessa buried her face in her hands. David sank back down, his voice breaking. "Dad, what happens now?" I looked between them, the son I'd raised to be honest, and the woman who'd turned that honesty into a weapon. I felt no triumph, no relief, only exhaustion. "What happens now," I said, "is that you face what you've done. Detective Monroe will need full cooperation. You'll testify against Holland and his partners. Every document, every message, every payment you handed over." Tessa nodded weakly. "I'll do whatever it takes." "Good," I said, "because this family won't survive another lie." David wiped his eyes. "Dad, can you ever forgive us?" I stared at him for a long moment. "Forgiveness isn't free, son. It's earned. And it starts with telling the truth. All of it." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. The wind outside shifted, whistling through the chimney, and I suddenly thought of Eleanor again. Her laughter, her calm, her certainty that love was meant to be patient, even when it hurt. I didn't know if I could ever forgive Tessa, but for David's sake, and maybe Eleanor's, I was willing to try to understand. Because love, even betrayed, still carried a trace of hope. And hope, I realized, might be the only thing strong enough to rebuild what they had shattered. 3 days later, the air in Camden carried that cold stillness before a snowstorm. The gulls were silent, the harbor glassy and gray. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from my coffee, when Detective Ava Monroe called. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice brisk but not unkind. "We've uncovered something significant. I'd like you to meet me at a property your late wife owned in Belfast. The shipyard." "The shipyard?" I repeated. "I didn't even know it existed until last week." Her tone softened. "That's exactly why you need to see this." By noon, I was driving up the coast with Ray Hollister in the passenger seat. The wind had picked up, sweeping snowflakes across the highway. Ray kept glancing out the window, his jaw tight. "She told me this day would come," he said quietly. "Eleanor?" He nodded. "When she first started that Veterans Project, she said, 'If I'm gone, make sure Charles knows I didn't leave him unguarded.' I thought she meant spiritually. Turns out, she meant legally. When we reached the shipyard, the gates were chained, but the sign above them still read Bennett Maritime Restoration. The paint was peeling, but the letters held firm. Detective Monroe was waiting near a warehouse door with 2 officers and a locksmith. "This facility was listed under a trust connected to your wife," she explained as the lock clicked open. "No one's accessed it since her death, until we found a key hidden in your home office drawer, taped inside a ledger marked Dry Dock Maintenance." My breath caught. The dry dock ledger. Eleanor's last message had led us here. Inside, the warehouse smelled of salt, rust, and old oil. Shafts of winter light streamed through broken skylights, dust swirling in the air like ghosts. At the far end stood a rusted filing cabinet, and a small safe bolted to the wall. The locksmith worked quickly. The safe door swung open with a hollow clang. Inside were 3 things: an audio recorder, a bundle of sealed envelopes, and a thick handwritten letter bound with blue ribbon. Detective Monroe handed me the letter. "It's addressed to you." My fingers trembled as I untied the ribbon. The handwriting was Eleanor's graceful, deliberate. "My dearest Charles, if you're reading this, it means I was right to be cautious. I discovered irregularities in the firm's handling of our estate last year. Tessa began asking about our holdings and insurance in ways that didn't sit right. I didn't want to believe she'd harm us, but something told me to prepare. I transferred most of our liquid assets into a private charitable trust under your name, the Bennett Marine Foundation. The shipyard is the trust's base. Only you and the board I appointed can access it. I wanted this legacy to serve others, not destroy our family. If anyone tries to contest the will, show this letter and the bank records inside the envelopes. They will prove my intent. Love always, Eleanor." My vision blurred as I reached the end. She'd been protecting me all along, even while dying. Detective Monroe opened the smaller envelopes. Each contained original bank statements, notarized contracts, and transfer confirmations legally airtight, dated 6 months before the forged will. "Your wife outsmarted them," she said, half smiling. "The fake documents never had legal standing. This foundation trust overrides any later revisions." Ray let out a low whistle. She played chess while everyone else was playing checkers. Ava examined the recorder and pressed play. Eleanor's voice filled the warehouse, softer than before but steady. "Ray, if you ever find yourself in danger, tell Charles not to fear the truth. The shipyard isn't just a business, it's his protection. And if Tessa comes after it, remember, the law protects intention, not greed." The sound of her voice hit me like a wave. I hadn't heard it in months, but it was as if she were standing right beside me. Detective Monroe turned to the officers. "We'll need to log all of this as evidence. But Mr. Bennett, this means you're completely cleared. The estate remains yours, and your wife's trust ensures no one can touch it." I nodded numbly, emotion tightening my throat. She always did think ahead. Ava studied me for a moment. "You realize, Mr. Bennett, that your wife's planning also implicates Pearson Holland in a much larger fraud operation. We've already traced similar forged amendments to 3 other estates. Your case may be the key to taking down the entire network." Ray exhaled. "That's the best news I've heard in years." But beneath the satisfaction, a strange sadness settled over me. Eleanor had carried this burden alone, sick and fading, knowing the people she loved most might betray her. She hadn't told me, not because she didn't trust me, but because she wanted to spare me the pain of suspicion. "Detective," I said softly, "what happens now?" "Now we build a case," she replied. "We'll need your testimony and Ray's records. And we'll subpoena Mrs. Tessa Bennett to cooperate fully." Ray gave a bitter laugh. "Something tells me she won't enjoy community service as much as she enjoyed shopping sprees." Ava smiled faintly. "She may not have a choice." As we stepped back into the cold afternoon light, snow began to fall, a soft, steady curtain over the empty shipyard. The sound of waves against the docks echoed like a heartbeat. I looked at the vast space Eleanor had dreamed of transforming for veterans, and for the first time since her funeral, I felt her presence not as loss, but as strength. She'd built more than a business. She'd built a safeguard of love and foresight that no greed could undo. Ray clapped a hand on my shoulder. "She was something else, wasn't she?" I nodded. She was the storm and the harbor at once. As we locked up the warehouse, Detective Monroe turned to me. "There's one more thing, Mr. Bennett. You should know that Mrs. Bennett left you not only protection but purpose. The trust names you as chairman. The first funding transfer is due next week. She wanted you to run this place, to finish what she started." For the first time in months, I smiled. "Then I will." And as we drove back toward Camden through falling snow, I realized the truth, hidden inside all of Eleanor's careful planning. Sometimes love doesn't speak in words, it writes itself into the future, so you can find it when you need it most. 6 months passed before I realized how much my life had changed. The spring thaw came early to Camden, and for the first time since Eleanor's death, I found myself looking forward to the sound of the gulls and the steady rhythm of the tide. The world had a strange way of healing itself, even after storms. The trial against Pearson Holland was front-page news across Maine. Detective Monroe's investigation uncovered a web of fraud that stretched far beyond my wife's estate. At least 7 families had been targeted, each with aging relatives, each with suspiciously altered wills. The evidence Ray had saved from the firm's database became the keystone in the case. When the verdict was read in a Portland courtroom that April, I sat in the second row beside Ray, listening in silence. Holland was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. His associates each received 2. The judge called their crimes a betrayal of the very trust that law is meant to protect. And Tessa, my daughter-in-law, stood trembling at the defense table as the sentence for her plea agreement was read. 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and full restitution of every cent she had paid to the firm. She'd chosen to cooperate, handing over emails, payment receipts, and text messages that tied the lawyers to the scheme. It saved her from prison, but not from consequence. When she turned around to look at me after the hearing, I didn't avert my eyes. I didn't smile either. There was nothing left to say between us. Afterward, Ray and I went for a walk along the wharf. He looked different now, cleaner clothes, steadier step, the shadow of a man who'd finally found solid ground again. I'd offered him a permanent position managing operations at the shipyard, and he'd accepted. "Feels good to breathe free air, doesn't it?" he said as we watched the boats drift out into the harbor. "It does," I replied. "Eleanor would have liked what we're doing here." "She'd be proud," he said quietly. The Bennett Marine Foundation had officially launched 2 weeks earlier. We'd begun refurbishing the Belfast shipyard, just as Eleanor had planned, turning it into a training and restoration center for veterans returning from the sea. The sound of hammers and saws had replaced the silence of decay. It was noisy, alive, purposeful. David had started helping too. He moved into a small apartment in Rockland after the divorce was finalized. Losing everything had stripped him down to the raw truth of himself. For months, he worked 12-hour shifts on fishing boats to pay back the remaining debts. But slowly, I saw a light come back into his eyes, the same spark he'd had as a boy when we built model ships together in the garage. One afternoon, he showed up at the shipyard in work boots and a flannel shirt, saying simply, "I want to help." Ray didn't hesitate. "Grab a hammer, son." Watching them work side by side was like watching two ghosts reconcile the past and the present, finally learning how to exist in the same space. That evening, over clam chowder and black coffee in the mess hall we were renovating, David looked at me. "Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, "but I want to earn back what I lost." I studied him for a moment. The guilt was still there in his eyes, but so was humility. "Earning it back starts here," I said, "one beam at a time." He smiled faintly. "Then, I'll start with the beams." Tessa never came back to Camden. From what Detective Monroe told me, she was serving her community service hours at a shelter in Portland. Ironic, given how she once looked down on people who had nothing. But maybe that irony was the point. I didn't wish her harm. I just hoped the work would show her what real desperation looked like, the kind that doesn't steal from others to survive. As the foundation took shape, the press began calling it the Widow's Harbor. The name made me laugh at first, but it stuck. Donations poured in. Within months, we'd hired a full staff and taken on our first trainees, 4 Navy veterans, learning to repair engines and rebuild boats. On the morning of the dedication ceremony, Detective Monroe came up to me holding a polished brass plaque engraved with Eleanor's name. "Thought you should be the one to place it," she said. The plaque read, "In memory of Eleanor Bennett, who believed love is the strongest anchor." My hands trembled slightly as I bolted it to the wall by the shipyard gate. When the last screw tightened, I stepped back, and for a moment the wind off the bay caught my breath. "She'd like this," Ava said softly. I nodded. "She'd like that it helps people. She'd like that something good came from all of it." She smiled faintly. "You know, most people in your position would have sold this place, taken the money, and disappeared. You turned it into something better. Eleanor wouldn't have it any other way." As the sun sank low over the water, the bay glowed gold and copper. Workers packed up their tools, laughter echoing through the yard. Ray waved from the dock, and David stood beside me, wiping grease from his hands. "You know," he said quietly, "Mom always said there's peace in building something with your own hands." "She was right," I said. He smiled. "Guess I'm finally learning that lesson." And I realized then that redemption doesn't always come from apologies or verdicts. It comes from labor, from showing up every day to rebuild what was broken. That night, when I returned to my cottage, I placed Eleanor's letter back in her jewelry box. The ribbon was frayed from use, but I kept it tied the way she had left it. I whispered into the quiet, "You were right, my love." The truth didn't sink, it floated. And for the first time in a long while, I slept soundly, knowing that even in death, Eleanor had guided me safely home. Summer came gently to the coast that year. The air was thick with salt and pine, and the Bennett Marine Foundation was alive, with the sounds of life, again men shouting over machinery, gulls circling above the docks, the hum of a rebuilt engine echoing through the bay. The shipyard, once silent and hollow, had found its rhythm, and so had I. Every morning, I walked down the pier with a mug of coffee, the same route Eleanor used to take when she inspected the boats. The sunrise painted the harbor in gold, and I'd pause by the plaque bearing her name, tracing the engraved letters with my fingers. Who believed love is the strongest anchor. I finally understood what she meant. Ray was standing near the office, wiping his hands on a rag. "Morning, Captain," he called. I chuckled. "Captain? Haven't been one of those in years." "You've earned the title again," he said with that crooked grin. "You kept this ship from sinking." David joined us a few minutes later, carrying a tray of muffins from the local bakery. His face was brighter these days, the lines of regret slowly softening. "I brought breakfast," he said. Ray threatened to quit if I showed up empty-handed. Ray raised his hands in mock protest. I said no such thing. I smiled at the two of them. It wasn't perfect. Some wounds would never fully heal, but there was peace in the small, ordinary moments. Around mid-morning, Detective Monroe arrived in her usual Navy coat. She was off duty, but had stopped by to drop off paperwork, confirming the final closure of the Pierce and Holland case. "All done," she said. "Every family's estate has been restored. You started something much bigger than your own fight, Mr. Bennett." I looked around at the bustling shipyard. "I didn't start it," I said. "Eleanor did. She saw the storm coming and left us a map to survive it." Ava smiled. "Still, you chose to follow it. Most people would have walked away." I watched the workers hauling planks and ropes, the sea glittering behind them. "You know what I've learned, Detective? You can't outrun betrayal, but you can choose what to build after it. You can either rebuild walls or build harbors." She tilted her head, considering that a harbor sounds better. "It is," I said softly. "A harbor forgives the tide every time it leaves." That afternoon, after everyone left, I sat alone on the dock as the light began to fade. The air was cool, and the water rippled with the colors of the sunset: amber, rose, and violet. I thought about how close I'd come to losing everything, and how strangely that loss had given me something deeper. Eleanor's foundation wasn't just saving the shipyard, it was saving people. Veterans who needed work, families who needed hope, and even my son, who needed a way to start over. I took out the last note Eleanor had written me, folded carefully in my wallet. The ink had faded, but her words still carried warmth. "Charles, if you ever feel lost, remember truth floats. It always finds the surface, even when everything else sinks." The sea breeze lifted the edge of the paper, as if she were whispering through it. I smiled. In that moment, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about erasing what had happened. It was about refusing to let pain decide who you become. I stood, watching the horizon where the sky met the sea. The last light of day shimmered across the water, and the shipyard lights flickered on behind me. "I kept your promise," I said quietly to the wind. "The legacy's safe." And as the tide rolled in, gentle and endless, I knew that love, real love, never dies. It just changes form, turning into the strength that carries you forward when everything else falls apart. That was Eleanor's final gift. And it was enough.